Peace and blessings, global family. This is Eraka-R, and this is the second in what's looking like a 5-part series entitled Personal Peace in Global Chaos. This installment picks up where the first one left off, and if you haven't seen that, I encourage you to do that first. The link is in this post. And in this installment, I will say more about the first of the 3 reasons I gave that I have chosen not to navigate what is happening in the United States and around the world from a position of anger or hatred or anxiety or fear. I have an understanding of what's happening, and that's the first reason. I have an understanding of what's happening because I have worked very hard and continue to work very hard to base my truth about anything on facts, not hopes, not dreams, not wishes, but facts. I have an understanding of what's happening because I remember that the United States is a country, and it is one of many countries that make up our world. And if I am going to avoid being shocked and dismayed by new announcements of things every day, it is important to have a perspective of the United States as a country, which means understanding its history and in the context of world history, because there's nothing new under the sun, and what is happening now is not new. I have an understanding because I remember how the United States was founded. And I'm not talking about pilgrims or the Mayflower or brave Western frontiersmen. I'm talking about how the United States was founded and how the United States was built. And I'm not going to elaborate any further on that because doing so will disturb my personal peace. But I'm going to pause for a moment so that you can remind yourself how the United States was founded and how the United States was built. Yeah, I have an understanding, and my truth is that karma is a fact. I have an understanding of what's happening because I remember that the southern states' vision of what the U.S. should be was so different from the northern states' vision that the southern states wanted to secede and start their own country, leading to the bloodiest battle in the history of the United States. And while that war ended and a treaty was signed, a treaty is a document, and it changes behavior, but it does not change the mindset. It does not change the heart, the spirit, the soul, and the truth of those who signed the treaty. I realize that the Civil War never ended, except it may be being won now. I have an understanding of what's happening because I have studied the decades in which the Nazis ruled Germany and 20 million people died. I have studied the centuries of chattel enslavement throughout the Americas in which 100 million people died. And I am no longer surprised by what human beings are capable of doing to each other. I have an understanding because I remember the pledge made by David Duke in 1979, Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan, that they were going to stop marching in the streets and that they were going to infiltrate American society through law enforcement, education, and politics. And I remember the 2006 FBI report, the FBI report, that the infiltration of law enforcement by white supremacists and neo-Nazis was, quote, the greatest single threat to domestic security, close quotes. So if they were successful in that arena, they were successful in education, they were successful in politics. And what we're seeing now is evidence of that infiltration. I have an understanding because I remember the swiftness and the stealth with which the Patriot Act was passed in 2001, decimating the Bill of Rights, decimating it and laying the foundation for fascism that we are experiencing today. I have an understanding because my truth is that the America that has been projected and been perceived was lost on September 26th of 2020 when Amy Barrett was appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court, giving it a conservative majority. Because as the headlines every day demonstrate, when you lose the force of law, you lose. I have an understanding of what's happening because I remember that the United States was founded as an experiment in democracy. But democracy demands vigilance and participation of its citizens. And the transformation of the U.S. population from citizens to consumers abandoned that vigilance. And it created the 1% that are now in control of the United States government. So I am very careful about hating anyone. I'm very careful about where I point the finger of blame for what is happening in the United States today. And lastly, I have an understanding of what's happening because in the context of world history, the United States is an infant, and it is joining the long list of countries that in their infancy experienced the collapses and restructuring of their governments. And while my heart aches and my soul weeps for the thousands of lives that are being impacted by the devastating actions of this current administration, I recognize that they and we are bloodless casualties in a new American revolution. These are just some of the facts upon which I base my personal truth, that I will not be navigating these times from a condition of rage or hatred or anxiety or fear that debilitate my well-being while having absolutely no impact on the conditions themselves. Now, don't get it twisted. I am not saying that there shouldn't be activism against war, against fascism, against racism, against genocide in the US and around the world. That is not what I'm saying. And for those of you who may be fueled in your activism by rage or anxiety or fear or even hatred, God be with you. What I am saying is, I will not be protesting. I will not be writing and calling others to action. I will not be marching because I recognize that these are meaningful and necessary avenues for releasing the pressure that is built up by rage, anxiety, fear, and hatred. But I don't need those releases because I'm not standing in those conditions. And most importantly, it is my understanding that you cannot make a moral appeal to an entity that does not share your moral values. Now, that said, I have been an educational activist all of my adult life. And these times in which we live have reminded me of my most important truth. And that is, until individual evolution becomes a global educational priority, until we make it most important to learn how to be human and how to live with other human beings, there will always be war. There will always be fascism. There will always be genocide, no matter how much we hope and wish that it won't be. I have been preparing for the past year to come out of my idyllic semi-retirement in Mexico and return to my mission of personal human empowerment. My activism seeks to address the cause of genocide and fascism and war, not the effects. And I affirm that you will find value in that work. In my next installment, I will address the second reason why I choose to pursue the power of personal peace in global chaos. Until we reconnect, peace and